in. My name is Councillor Morley, and it is 7 o'clock. We're very excited to be hosting this second information session this evening, and hope folks can see and hear us all loud and clear. We're really excited to be joined this evening by some of our wonderful staff at the City of Toronto from our Transportation Services Department, including Adam Popper, Senior Project Manager, Jacquelyn Hayward, Director of Transportation Project Design and Management. From Environment and Climate, we have Cecilia Fernandez joining us, who's our Manager of Policy and Research. From City Planning, Rezoski, our Manager of Community Planning, who's also supported by Elisabeth Silva Stewart, who's on the call as well. And then finally, from Policy Planning, Finance and Administration, we have Robin Shilett, our Public Consultation Unit, on behalf of Alyssa Serbu, who sends her regrets, but is also part of the consultation team and lead for this particular project. So as you all know, we are hosting this information session to answer the questions you've been asking about why this project is necessary. This project includes road safety improvements and public realm upgrades. It also ensures accessibility and safety for all residents, supports our climate goals and active transportation initiatives, and addresses the evolving needs of our growing communities. So we're really excited for this session this evening, and we're going to jump in next to our land acknowledgement. Also, just a quick note for folks, we are recording this session and we'll have it posted and available for future viewing if you are interested on YouTube, so keep posted for that. And this evening, we acknowledge the land we are meeting on is a traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. As a Torontonian of African descent, we're also really proud to hold space for African ancestral acknowledgement, and the City of Toronto acknowledges all treaty peoples, including those who came here as settlers, as migrants, either in this generation or in generations past, and those of us who came here involuntarily, particularly those brought to these lands as a result of the transatlantic slave trade and slavery. We pay tribute to those ancestors of African origin and descent. So for this evening, we will be taking you through a brief project overview and update. We'll have staff presentations on project context and policy. So our Vision Zero and Cycling Network Plan, TransformTO, our climate goals and policy related to that, our community planning, projected growth in the neighborhood, and then of course we're holding space for a Q&A at the end of the presentations, followed by closing remarks and next steps for what you can expect related to this project. As always, it's really important to us, even when we're meeting in a virtual context, to set the tone and expectations of our meeting and coming together for important community discussions. The City of Toronto is an inclusive public organization. Discriminatory, prejudicial, or hateful comments and questions will not be tolerated. We appreciate your respectful, thoughtful, and open engagement on this ongoing project. So during the Q&A, we're trying something a little new. So we'll prioritize questions that relate specifically to the topics covered in this information session, including our policies, objectives, and how this project contributes to our various goals as a city. And we have a cool way that you can include your questions for us as we go throughout the presentation tonight. So there's a form. We'll be taking your questions through this online form, and you can put as many questions as you like or do our best to triage and get to them based on the timing available. So you can go to ambermorley.com/questions, and you'll see a form that looks like the one before you on the slide. Super easy. Pop your question in and submit, and my staff will receive that on the back end and we'll be able to bring it to my attention so we can go through them and when we get to that portion. So with that, I'd like to invite Adam Popper, our Senior Project Manager for the Bloor West Complete Street Project, to take us through a presentation on updates related to this project. So Adam, over to you.
Thank you, Councillor. Thanks, everyone. Great to be with you again this evening. I'll give you a brief presentation and hand it off to some of my colleagues. So for those of you joining the project for the first time, and for those of you who've been here before or at similar events, just as a reminder, the Bloor Street West Complete Street Extension Project aims to make travel safer, more inviting, and attractive for everyone. It's 4.6 kilometers in length, and it was approved last year in June by Toronto City Council. There are 2 phases. The first phase has been installed, and the second phase is planned for installation in the coming weeks and months. So the project goals are to improve safety for everyone, people walking, people cycling, people driving. We're also looking to enhance the walking and cycling experience, as well as supporting the qualities that make Bloor Street a place. It's not just a road that we move through, it's a series of places all along. And we're looking at those details, especially with the BIAs and also residential communities, to enhance those qualities. Maintaining road space is also vitally important for transit, for emergency services, deliveries, shopping, commuting. We work with many partners to achieve all of these goals. So what you may have been involved with in the past was the preliminary design. If you were a stakeholder like a business improvement area or a business, we did our original reach out to some of the businesses to understand loading and their pickup and drop off needs. We sent a mailer out to more than 30,000 residents and had 2 public consultation events that were well attended. City Council considered the staff's recommendation at the Infrastructure and Environment Committee and Toronto City Council, and this was approved in June of last year. And installation began in September. It was then paused for winter. So what's coming up? Phase 1 installation, we have some final touches to put on that. So some of the pavement markings, for example, that were paused for winter, and some adjustments that I'll talk about, as well as phase 2 installation, which should start in May. We will also conduct a series of counts for phase 1 in May. That was when we conducted counts in 2022 to inform the design of the project. So 2 years hence, we'll be able to use those to compare before and after. CAFE-TO returns, and we'll continue to update the website. In the summer and the fall, there'll be some traffic signal modifications and retiming for the purpose of safety and efficiency, and there are several along the corridor, as well as spot upgrades, and I'll give you an example of that in just a second, with the purpose of adding parking, straightening out the bikeway where there are bend outs and people have to wiggle through, as well as improved placemaking. And again, we'll continue to update the website. And if you want to stay engaged with this project, there's a few ways, but one of them is about the South Kingsway Mossam Road Riverview Gardens intersection, where the project team will host a consultation on the long-term future of that intersection. So phase 2 is west of Aberfoyle Crescent and takes us all the way to Resurrection Road. And there are 3 sort of sub-segments. Generally speaking, there's more roadway space in this segment than there were in phase 1. And so we're able to maintain 2 westbound lanes while meeting all of the other project goals, including adding cycling facilities in both directions. Some updates that we'll be making, there are some decorative curb extensions that also add flex post bollards to shorten the pedestrian crossing distance and reducing the exposure of pedestrians. We'll work closely with CAFE-TO to ensure that all of those cafes can be added, for which there are permits requested. Green bus, bike, and turn cue boxes. The green paint that will help make certain intersection movements clearer for all road users and ultimately safer was not installed in December when we paused for winter. And so that will come very soon, as well as some minor adjustments on side streets. I mentioned some of the traffic signals that will be modified. These include Old Mill Trail, Jane Street, and Windermere. And then we're also looking at some safety and efficiency improvements in phase 2 before we install, but this will come as a separate sub phase later this year or early next year. And then we've already installed most of these Zikla platforms. These are where bus passengers the platform is raised, and so people don't have to step off of the sidewalk, nor does the bus have to pull to the sidewalk. It straightens out the route for bus drivers who much prefer this. There's accessibility benefits. There's also the ability to preserve more parking. So there's lots of benefits to these, and we'll be adding more in phase 2. Many people have provided feedback that there is not enough space for parking, especially in the Kingsway along where there's a center median. And so we're looking to make adjustments in the coming weeks where the curbs and some of the paint will be shifted toward the sidewalk, thus providing more space for people parking and still providing space for people cycling. Today, the bridges do not have physical separation. There's a special set of considerations when we work on bridges to ensure that they're structurally sound. The other opportunity here is to work with local artists to paint special barriers, and that will help honor those particular localities, and that's Humber and Mimico. We're also looking to make specific improvements, spot improvements, where there are other gaps in the network, such as the missing sidewalk along the cemetery. So that will be planned, that's planned for this summer. And I mentioned some updates that are coming. This is a detailed design concept file, but just to give you a sense, here is Grenview Boulevard on the north side, and what we're looking to do is straighten out the bikeway and improve some public realm areas, as well as some green infrastructure. And this is also at the same time, we'll be adding a raised crossing. So that brings pedestrians up to the level of the sidewalk. It's sort of a speed hump for drivers. So all of these things are planned for this summer, and then some will be happening in the next construction season. Many people are interested in measurement. We took many counts before the project was installed. All of these are available on open data. We're also happy to share them with you. If you're interested, you can always email the project team. Afterwards, we've also started to collect some counts on vehicle travel time and vehicle speeds that will be released very soon. And that's an initial snapshot, but this work is ongoing. As well, after we do those counts in May that I just spoke about, there'll be a larger release of data on the website. Many people are interested in this. We're happy to share it. And this is part of how we analyze our projects and learn and continue to connect with members of the public and interest groups. So I just want to give you a 30-second rundown of the website, just because there is a lot of information there. So many people have asked questions. There's a large FAQ section at the top, installation updates. As phase 2 comes into play, there'll be an installation notice mailed to all residents, but if one of your neighbors says that it, or if they accidentally throw it in the recycle bin, all that information will be posted here. We received lots of feedback and made many changes as a result of that feedback, as well as a variety of specific questions that people have about how to get a new accessible loading zone added, how the traffic study was conducted, and so on. So we really hope you can get most of your questions answered by looking at the website. And if you still have questions, please email us at bloorcompletestreet@toronto.ca, and Alyssa will direct it to the best person. Thanks so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Adam, for that great snapshot and all of the good work. It's really encouraging for me as well to see specifically the areas that have been improved since installation, because a lot of that work has been as a result of feedback from our local BAAs, our local residents, and a result of really good and hard work between staff. So thank you for highlighting that. And I just want to encourage folks once again to, if you do have questions as we go, or something that's been percolating for you about this project in advance of joining us, please do check out ambermorley.com councilmorley.com/questions, and throw your questions into the chat. I'm just keeping an eye here on my other screen to see, and I don't have any yet. So I just want to encourage you all to participate in that way. So next we have Jacquelyn Hayward, our Director of Transportation Project Design and Management, who's going to share more about the city's Vision Zero, our road safety goals, and the cycling network plan, which this project is just one piece of. So Jacquelyn, over to you.
Great, thanks very much, Councillor. I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about the Vision Zero Road Safety Plan and how that relates to complete streets and road safety, and then a little bit about the cycling network plan. The guiding policies that this project is built upon are directives from Council that go as deep as the Toronto official plan and include the Vision Zero Road Safety Plan, which I'll talk about in a minute, as well as the TransformTO Climate Action Strategy, which you'll hear from other colleagues about later this afternoon. But there are a number of different policy objectives and guiding policy documents that Council has directed that staff implement, and that's where projects like this are initiated from. We also work through design guidelines that are both city oriented as well as in the overall transportation and engineering field. The Vision Zero Road Safety Plan has specific design guidelines as well as the Complete Street Guidelines and the National Association of City Transportation Officials guidelines around these types of infrastructure developments. A complete street approach is language that you have heard us talk about, and that's very much as Adam was saying, talking about building streets for people in terms of prioritizing safety and universal accessibility, as well as the places that those streets are in terms of community space and places to sit, and having a public realm that you walk along, and streets that support local business in terms of local loading and parking needs, and cafe TO, mobility options, to support the operation of business along these corridors. The Vision Zero approach is what the road safety plan is based on, and that's direction from Council that we should be building our roads in such a way that no fatalities as a result of collisions or serious injuries as a result of collisions are acceptable on our streets. And yes, that is a lofty goal. It is difficult to achieve, but it is a goal that cities around the world have been making strides to get closer to. It is the notion that traffic fatalities are preventable, and it's a systemic approach to changing the way that we design and operate our transportation system in order to support safer roads for people who live within our communities and use those roads in all different ways. And the road safety plan at the City of Toronto is built with the 6 key objectives that are our focus areas right now, namely the speed management strategy, which I'm going to expand upon, as well as road design improvements, some of which are specifically around addressing high-risk mid-block crossings and left turn and right turn collisions. There's also an element of enhanced police enforcement and education and engagement. The emphasis areas are the areas of vulnerable road users that we focus on trying to reduce collisions because they're most impacted by collisions, and that's primarily pedestrians, school children, older adults, as well as people cycling and motorcyclists. The speed management strategy that I just referred to, it's very all-encompassing in terms of a revised speed limit setting practice for roads across our city, from arterial roads collectors down to locals. You've seen us, I'm sure, on many of the roads that you use, having those speed limits be coming down. It's also about changing the way that the roads are designed in order to induce the revised speed limits to make that safer. Enhanced police enforcement is something that we help fund the police to have more police enforcement focused on road safety initiatives, as well as the automated speed enforcement factor that we have 75 speed cameras across the city and are looking to increase those when contracts for those are available to do so. We've been deploying watch your speed signs primarily on local streets and trying to make sure that the speed that is enforced is in place for those streets is enforced and is achievable. Some of the road safety improvements that we have been delivering across the city and are important for projects like this in reducing collisions at intersections is a pedestrian head start signal. So you've probably seen across the city, we have almost 1,000 locations that have these in place. where a walk signal is in advanced before vehicles get a green signal to proceed. And the purpose of that is to reduce turning collisions, which you see as primarily as an important way to improve road safety. Increasing the visibility of pedestrians in that intersection is a way that we can have reduced collisions from both right turn and left turn collisions and crosswalks. Another road design improvement, which Adam touched upon, is the corner radii changes, both either painted or permanently constructed. When we have a tighter corner radii, we increase road safety because the crossing distance for pedestrians is reduced, and it slows vehicle turning movement so that the impact, if collisions happen, is less likely to result in serious injury. So those are just a couple of the ways that projects like this produce road safety benefits. I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about the cycling network plan as well. This is a plan that was approved by Toronto City Council initially in 2016, which builds upon the existing network of cycling routes to both connect gaps in the network, to grow the network into new parts of the city, and to increase the quality and safety of the existing cycling network routes. When we talk about cycling network, there are many different types of bikeways, and so you'll see the cycle tracks that are on Bloor Street as one example, but in painted bike lanes, multi-use trails, and slow neighborhood greenways or contourful bike lanes are other ways in which the cycling network is appropriately designed for the different environments that it's in. When we make recommendations to council as staff, we take inputs from the public because you have lived experience and expertise living in your communities, and we couple that with the policy direction that we have from council and the prioritization frameworks that projects are assessed upon, as well as the technical design standards. So those things come together to bring forward a recommendation in the most objective and data-driven means that we can balance with the public input that we receive. In developing the cycling network plan, we seek public input at that plan level, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the plan level in a moment, as well as at the individual project stage. And I know that Adam spoke about the kind of engagement that happened with the public through earlier phase of the Bloor Street project, and we'll continue to seek feedback and adjust the project as needed based on feedback that we hear. I mentioned earlier the prioritization as the cycling network is developed. The kind of categories that we include are around safety, where there's a history of safety concerns. Locations are identified to be able to be prioritized. An important aspect of our work is ensuring that the cycling network and all transportation infrastructure is provided in an equitable way, making cycling as an option accessible to more people of diverse community needs. We look at current cycling demand for sure, where there are existing numbers of people cycling, but we also look at potential cycling demand, where based on the forecasted growth in areas where we see the potential to have cycling demand increase. Network coverage in terms of accessibility for people who live and work within close proximity to the cycling network. It's important to be able to make sure it's usable, the way it's connected, the destinations it serves, the transit connections that it accesses so people can make multimodal trips, and does that route can overcome barriers. So key barriers being ravines and rail lines that prevent people from making good connections across the network. So we've been working on an update to the cycling network plan for the 2025 to 2027 period. Currently, there's a long list of review being done to bring what you see on this map in red down to a sizable number that can be delivered within a 3-year period. For Ward 3, you can see the red lines are the candidate routes that we're currently undertaking some very preliminary technical feasibility assessment on to be able to inform whether those routes would be studied or further designed and consulted on in the next stage of the project. Some of the projects that are identified for Ward 3 are because there is upcoming road work, either in 2027 or in the years following 2027, like 2028, 29, 30. So a good time for us to be studying these routes to determine if and what the right cycling network connection could be is within this next stage of the plan. So some of the routes identified here are within this ward, but at this point it would be the the study work that would happen for potential future implementation bundled with future road work. Future road work is a really important time for us to be considering these routes because there is a greater likelihood that we can accommodate the cycling network improvements on some of these streets without impacting as much the vehicle lanes and having less construction impact for community. A number of routes could be identified that only paint or modular materials could be delivered as a bikeway within existing curbs. So some of the routes that are being assessed within this ward are listed here. These would more likely be near-term delivered, so not at a study level, but something that we would be undertaking some design and undertaking consultation and seeking feedback on within the next 3-year period. There's also 2 routes within this ward that have been identified that would require extensive feasibility study, so we're currently assessing whether they would be prioritized in this time frame. There are 2 projects within this ward led by others that we're keeping in mind that could be within this near-term program. So one is the Hydro Corridor Trail Greenway project being led by Hydro One, and a bus rapid transit project being led by Metrolinx on Dundas Street West. So the stage that we're at, just to finalize this part of the presentation, is that we are currently doing the prioritization and technical review and in taking feedback that we received earlier in the year in order to report to Council and the Infrastructure and Environment Committee about what the near-term plan would look like. The smaller list from that long list that I described would be brought to Council in mid-2024. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jacquelyn. Really appreciate that high level, but really a lot of, I think, important details that speak to the need for and frankly the value of the direction that we're working hard to move in a good way with our community. So really appreciate that. So next up is Cecilia Fernandez. Cecilia is joining us from the Environment and Climate Division to share information about TransformTO, which is our city's climate strategy. Just one last little reminder to please do drop in your questions into the question box as they come up, and we look forward to getting to those when we get to that portion. Cecilia, over to you.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Very nice, very pleased to be here and to be able to share some information about our TransformTO net zero strategy and really what my colleagues have been talking about regarding the Bloor West corridor, Complete Streets project, Vision Zero, and the cycling network plan, how they nest and really contribute to the goals that we've set out in our net zero strategy. Just gonna move this around a bit. So some of you might remember that back in 2019, Toronto City Council had declared a climate emergency. And the reason that they declared this emergency was because we were already experiencing the effects of climate change. And you'll see on this slide on the right-hand side, what we call the year of the flood. So in 2017, that's when Toronto Island was flooded completely because of a rise in the lake levels along Lake Ontario through the St. Lawrence. And those types of events in Toronto are felt by residents, are responded to by the city staff, but also cost the city money. And on the left-hand side, you can see that there have been a series of events since 2005 that cost the city in the millions of dollars. So 44 million, 65 million, 101 million, 28 million. And just recently, we've had extreme snow in 2022, and that has cost also about 17 million. And so we were called as part of a city movement globally to act on climate. And we also know as part of a city actor, we are among the jurisdictions in the world that are moving fastest on our commitments. And our commitment is enshrined in the TransformTO strategy. And that strategy commits our city to reducing our greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by the year 2040. It's one of the most ambitious plans in North America, And it goes further than what Council originally agreed to in 2017, which was net zero by 2050. And this document is available online. On the right-hand side, what I've outlined here is our latest report on the status of our progress. And what you'll see here is that we are meeting so far our targets. So in 2020, we established a target of 30% reduction of greenhouse gases from a 1990 level, and we met that target. We had exceeded that target in 2020. Similarly, in 2021, we don't have a target, but when we measured our emissions, we did see that we were at a 41% reduction, so in pretty good shape. But we also know that in 2021, this was a year after COVID, where we saw a lot of emissions go down from transportation because of the COVID pandemic. And so one of the things that we're taking away from that is that we are seeing an increase in emissions since 2021. By 2025, we have to reach a 45% reduction, and that means that from now, which is 2020, the last time that we measured at 14.5 megatons, we have to reduce our emissions by about 1 megaton to reach that 2025 target. And by 2030, we need to reduce our emissions by 65%, which is basically halving our current emissions, a very ambitious target, in order to get to the 2040 goal. Now, one of the things that my office does is we do monitor and measure our emissions every year, and we have an inventory, an emissions inventory that's published every year. And in that inventory, what we try to do is to break down the sources of those emissions. So you'll see again on the left-hand side the pie, which shows you the total emissions, 14.5 megatons. 8 and a bit of those megatons come from buildings alone, so that's about 56% of the city's total emissions. About 5 megatons come from transportation, which make up about 35% of the city's emissions, and then 9% from waste, and that's about 1.3 megatons. So what we further do is then break down each sector emissions. And transportation emissions account for approximately 5.1 megatons, but they are the second largest source of emissions. So they are like 35% of the total community emissions. And when we break that circle down a bit more, we can see that single passenger vehicles or single occupancy vehicles make up about 68% of that total 35%. And that is primarily from gasoline. And so one of the things that I'll talk about a little bit later is how we're trying to reduce gasoline as a source of emissions to fight climate change. The second biggest category is commercial light vehicles. Then we have the heavy vehicles that mainly go through Toronto. And then we also account for some for our waste trucks, for marine and rail emissions as well. Some of the work that's gone into the TransformTO target setting and target calibration has been very technical work. So back again in 2017, and we repeated this process in 2020, what we looked at was what cities around the world are doing to reduce their emissions. And then we brought that information to both our colleagues across the city and also the public. And what we generated from those processes, a fairly extensive public consultation process, fairly extensive and ongoing relationship building and work within the city of Toronto itself. And we had specific panels. We had an Indigenous climate circle, and we also had a climate panel of citizens. And we took all their input and we developed a list of actions. Then we took those actions and we put them into a technical model. And those actions then were modeled out into the future so that we could understand the relative impact of those specific actions on how we were going to look into the future. So you can see that here that, we bundle those actions into some critical categories like renewable energy, sustainable transportation, low carbon buildings, and of course, grid decarbonization. We know that to meet net zero, you can see by the curve that even if we did everything that we could, we would still need our grid to be quite clean in order to reach that net zero. But I wanted to bring your attention to the key groups of actions within the sustainable transportation, which is most relevant to our discussion today. So it's the electrification of personal vehicles, electrification of transit, and then really promoting active transportation, so getting people out of their cars. And so those actions then got translated and calibrated into our goals. And these are the goals that we try to orient all of our policies, programs, and work towards. So I've highlighted here those that are relevant to transportation again. So by 2030, in order to reach that 2040 goal, we have to have 30% of registered vehicles in Toronto being electric. And we do have federal policy, which is supporting that. So by 2035, most vehicles that will be sold will have to be electric. On the city side here, we're trying to orient everything towards the 75% of school, work, and transit trips under 5 kilometers are walked, biked, or by transit. So again, I see this as being, these projects as being very relevant to fitting into and nesting into our larger climate goals. This is just a slide to show you that again, gearing ourselves towards those goals, we try to develop programs and policies to support them. So I won't go through every one of them, but some of you may already be familiar with a number of them happening at the home level, the household level, with different incentives and programs geared towards home energy and reducing home energy. Large portion of our planning work putting towards the Toronto Green Standard, which is basically going to eliminate some of the high carbon energy sources in Toronto in any new buildings. We have council approval to start to look at performance standards for every building in Toronto. We have our own buildings that we're looking at in terms of corporate buildings. And then we have some land use work going with the missing middle housing. And also we have large projects like the sewer heat recovery project to reduce carbon emissions. Similarly, in transportation, the projects we're talking about today are really relevant and are part of that bigger system that we're trying to implement in order to get to our goals. And then lastly, we have a number of waste-oriented projects and programs. You may already know that we do harvest renewable natural gas from organic waste in the city through Jacquelyn and Disco landfills, and looking at methane capture in other landfills as well. I also just wanted to give you a bit of a status update, because when we went to council with the TransformTO strategy, we did say that we are going to report every year back on that strategy. So we just published that report, and it was brought to Infrastructure and Environment in late March. And so here are some highlights, again, focusing on the transportation pieces. So in terms of safe walking and biking, we noticed that before the pandemic, we actually measured that there is more safe walking and biking infrastructure than before the pandemic, and that our budgets, our city budgets, continue to align with the business's plan scenario, or the pace that is what we consider a business's planned pace. And so what we're going to be doing in the near future is to, again, use the information from our colleagues in the cycling groups to help us with identifying where we might be able to scale up some of those projects. We know that bus trips are getting greener, The TTC has very ambitious greening their bus fleet plans and that they're moving forward. But we know also that ridership has not recovered to pre-pandemic levels. And we are going to be releasing an electric vehicle strategy, a long-term planning look coming up in May of this year that will identify where and how much electric vehicle infrastructure we need in order to increase uptake and purchase of electric vehicles, and also identify what are some of the equity issues that might surround, the city moving forward on that. Lastly, I wanted to leave you just with this. So we did, as I mentioned, go to IEC with our report on March the 27th. That report is going to council in mid-April. We are saying in our status update that we are making moderate progress towards our goals. There needs to be a focus on scale and speed. Most of our actions align with a business's plan scenario. Not all of them are aligning with the more ambitious net zero scenario, which will leave the city with an emissions gap, and we will have to be addressing that gap in order to meet our goals. Also wanted to mention to you that if you do want to be more involved in this process, we will be holding ourselves public consultations on the next implementation plan of TransformTO, which will cover the years 2026 to 2030. So just as I mentioned earlier that we had consulted the public in the formulation of actions for the first plan, we'll be going through that same exercise again later this fall, and we'd welcome your input. And that concludes my presentation. Thanks so much for your attention.
That's fantastic, Cecilia. Thank you so much for those great details. And as a member of IEC, this is definitely one we watch very closely and are really, encouraged by the work of staff, but understanding that our progress is dependent on our residents as well, right? Coming along this journey with us. So I'm really, really grateful for your work and you sharing that with us this evening. So we have one final presentation before we jump into the Q&A, and I see questions populating, so thank you for sharing those with us. Al Rezoski is joining us, who's one of two local planning managers for Etobicoke-Lakeshore, and Al will be sharing information about the planning context and potential future density coming to our stretch of Bloor. So sit down if you're not already sitting. As always, don't forget to submit your questions. This will be my final call out, and we'll jump into those after Al's presentation. Over to you, Al.
Thank you, Councillor Morley. I'm here tonight with Elisabeth. So along Bloor Street, we review development applications and we're involved in planning studies. So Elisabeth is east of Royal York and I'm west of Royal York within Ward 3. And we have a lot of planning applications. I'll talk about those tonight. And we also want to give you the planning policy context for this study area. Next slide, please. So along the corridor, we have two distinctive areas. We have at the east end within Ward 3, an avenue. And this is from our urban structure map in the official plan. And then we get into the red area at the western end, which is the Etobicoke Center. There are other areas that have some frontage on Bloor Street, such as parks and open space, which you see in the green, which would not be receiving much in terms of development activity. Next slide. So what are the avenues? These are important corridors along major streets in the city of Toronto. And this is where we are anticipating reurbanization. So increased height, increased density from what we see in these areas. They have a lot of potential. They're generally well served by transit. So this is our opportunity to create new housing and jobs. And the Etobicoke Centre is one of the growth centres in the city of Toronto. So we have other ones like Young Eglinton and downtown Toronto. And we want to enhance the concentration of employment and housing within these areas. And we want to take advantage of the wealth of transit in these areas. And also these areas generally have a lot of infrastructure that can support the growth. Next slide. we have our official plan land use map, and you can see along this area, it's primarily mixed use areas, which is the red category. There are some apartment neighborhoods, which is the orange category along Bloor Street West, and we've got 2 shades of green, which are for natural areas and parkland. And again, these land use designations, mixed use, and to a certain extent apartment neighborhoods, but at a lesser scale, encourage redevelopment. Next slide, please. So this is where most of the growth is happening within the city of Toronto. That is the good news side of it, that it is being contained in areas where we want to see it. And we also try to balance the growth in these areas between employment and residential uses. It's not just about creating a lot of new high-rise condominiums. We want to make sure we have that balance. We also want to make sure within these areas that we are locating and massing new buildings to provide appropriate transition for areas of different intensity and scale. And this is particularly appropriate on major arterials like Bloor, where you may have in behind the fronting properties a neighborhood designation. Next slide. So the neighborhood areas, we are now seeing council directed and approved initiatives to look at the yellow category, which is in, but these are areas that will be taking some growth, but at a much more lower scale than what we are seeing along our mixed use areas. Next slide. There are other layers that encourage intensification along Bloor Street. So this is a map that shows our protected major transit station areas. And so there are the 4 subway stations within Ward 3 along Bloor Street West. You can also see at the table on the lower left side, residents and jobs per hectare. So the province has required us to set targets to be achieved for intensification within these areas around subway stations. So there's the blue line, which identifies the area. Generally, they're an 800-meter area within, which is considered to be walking distance within a major transit station. Next slide. We also, what other planning tools do we have? We have urban design guidelines. We have the Bloor Kingsway urban design guidelines at the eastern end. And then they have the Etobicoke Centre urban design guidelines, which implement the policy environment for this area. And we look at things like the built form, which you can see in this illustration, but we also look at streetscape improvements in the area. So where can we do wider sidewalks? Where can we get mid-block connections? Where can we get new cycling infrastructure? How can we create more complete streets in these areas? Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk now about development activity within this area. Next slide. So I think we also want to just set this up by saying there are a lot of application requirements that address some of the concerns that come up through our community consultation. So one of them is a transportation impact study, and that looks at everything like, are there signals that have to get adjusted because of the additional traffic that may be occurring in these areas? What is the vehicular parking, the bicycle parking, if there's showers that are required to support active transportation in these areas? We also look at any transportation mitigation strategies. So how can we reduce vehicular modes of travel? So trying to get people more into active transportation, whether that's walking, cycling, or taking transit. There is also a concept site plan and a landscape plan that is provided, and that's when it gets into details in terms of sidewalks, walkways, patios, clearways, that type of thing. And then there's also the site plan application, which show the streetscape features, and there's a long list of items that are required for staff review. Next slide. Here's our map of Ward 3. So the gray is showing Ward 3. We do have sections of Bloor Street that are in Ward 2, so that's to the north and to the west of Ward 3, and we have Ward 4 to the east side of the Humber River. So the development applications are divided out by active applications, what have recently been built, and then the applications that are under review. Next slide. Accompanying table that we have a 3D representation of what we are anticipating along Bloor Street, and as it crosses over Dundas Street West. So you can see there's a lot of development application in the Etobicoke Centre, and it is up to heights of 55 stories. So similar to growth pressures that we're seeing in other centers like the Young Eglinton Centre. And we are trying to find a balance. So because these areas are very transit rich, we have multiple layers and additional layers coming like bus rapid transit into this area. We are trying to make sure that we're getting people shifting in how they get around. We are also providing jobs within the center so that people ideally can be very close to where they work. Otherwise, they would be taking transit perhaps to destinations within the city of Toronto and the larger GTA area. Next slide. So we prepared a table of our development applications, and it gives you the status, it gives you the file number. It also gives you a sense of how much we're anticipating in terms of residential units, and also what is being proposed and secured in terms of bicycle parking and vehicular parking spaces. Next slide. So what I really want to focus on is what the summaries in total of what we're anticipating in Ward 3 along Bloor Street West. We are anticipating a total of 16,061 residential units. It's a very large number. Generally, you take a multiplier of slightly less than 2, so you can see there's a large population increase that's going to be happening in this area. The lower right shows the new parking spaces, and you can see here that we are securing a higher amount of bicycle parking spaces than vehicular parking spaces. We have rechanged the parking standards, and we are encouraging developers to provide a minimal amount of vehicular parking. And we're encouraging other things like car share and bike share and bicycle parking spaces, pedestrian amenity and family-friendly units in conjunction with this growth. Next slide. Bike share Toronto infrastructure is part of our review process, and for larger developments, so we have large multi-tower and multi-building developments that are being proposed. Generally, we are requesting 1 to 2 standard bicycle parking stations per 500 residential units. So this is typically like 6 Points Plaza, for example, typically asking and getting 2 bike share stations. If they cannot be secured on the property, which would be the logical place to secure them, especially for our large development applications, we're taking a cash contribution to put them into the immediate area. And we deal with the various types of applications, zoning bylaw amendments, and then that would be followed by site plan control application. And that's when we get into the detail where it would be located. And we would also work with Toronto Parking Authority to make sure we have an adequate distribution throughout the larger geography. And each of these stations has 19 bike parking spaces or docks, and we are also working on now a lot of e-bike stations. So this actually increases the range in which people can travel using a City of Toronto bike share bike. Next slide. And so by concluding, I just want to say that we have a lot of development activity occurring in this area. And what we are trying to do is find some balance. And certainly by doing a complete project like this along Bloor Street West gives us the opportunity to encourage and support that type of active transportation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Al, for your sharing of that information. It's always amazing to me the level of demand and interest in development in the ward. And so I hope folks can also appreciate the volume that we're anticipating and the work that we're doing to set up a really healthy environment for that growth. So we've got 5 minutes left. We're going to do a bit of rapid fire with the questions. So bear with me and we'll try to keep our answers tight. But there's a few questions that are sort of similar. Um, One comes in specifically to, and you mentioned there's 4 subway stations along this area, Al. Some folks suggest that we don't need bike lanes on Bloor because there's already a subway underneath. Why is it important that we're putting bike lanes along a major transit corridor?
Okay, thank you.
Al? Yeah, please jump in.
Thank you for that question. We have to realize that there's different transportation users, and some people would prefer to be on the subway, but COVID actually showed us that what happens when you have a situation where people don't necessarily want to be crowded onto a subway or even be on a subway that's not necessarily crowded. So we found during COVID that a lot of people were actually looking for active transportation options. And the other thing is when the subway line goes down, if we have Toronto Bike Share, we have other options available that people will choose that and have that as an alternative. Some people may choose to have a multimodal journey where they may be walking part of it. They may be taking the subway and then they may be picking up, for example, the last part of their journey, a Toronto Bike Share bike to get to their job or their destination. So I think it's important to find that balance and accommodate all transportation users within a corridor.
Thank you, Al. The next one's for Adam. There's a two-parter for you, Adam, and it's related to the project page. So the first one is someone mentions their understanding that open access to the usage data for Bloor Street project is not yet available. So they just want to confirm if that's accurate, and if it is available, where can it be accessed? So that's part one. And part two to that question is, how do folks get signed up for notification on future projects? So Queensway Complete Street Project is a call out here, and the Fall 24 South Kingsway Moss and Bloor consultations. Where can they find more information about those projects? Is it the Bloor West site or another one? I'll throw those over to you.
Thanks, Councillor.
Toronto.ca/cycling.
Yep.
Yeah, for any cycling project, that's a great place to go. Also, toronto.ca/get involved. All of the city's consultations can be found from there. So whether it's a cycling related project, another form of infrastructure, all the planning studies. And then also if a project is within a certain geography, oftentimes they'll get notified through their councillor's office or a direct mail out from the project team. In terms of data, any usage data that predates the project can't be posted on the project website. The files are too large, but if people are interested, they can email Alyssa at the project email address and we can send that to you. The usage data has not yet been collected. As I mentioned earlier, May is when we're collecting that data, and we'll be releasing summaries of that, and we're happy to share the raw data as well once we've collected.
Great. So after May, with respect to that open data. Thank you so much, Adam. So we'll try to squeeze in a quick few more. There are questions around the number of bike racks near the subway and around local shops. Is there a minimum number of bike racks per square foot of shops similar to parking minimums, or is that not a policy in place yet?
For new developments, that's a policy, but if people have interest in more parking, they can email cycling@toronto.ca and we can send it to the various teams who look after different parts of the bicycle parking programs.
Great. I'm going to try to still squeeze in 2 more. Sorry. There's someone mentioned they're supportive of the plan, but not a fan of the white sticks. They find them unattractive, and we've heard some criticisms about the use of plastics in permanent infrastructure. Can you comment on whether these are going to be the long-term solution or if there's any consideration for alternatives to the white sticks?
Yeah, this is part of our quick build program. We definitely are interested in getting feedback, what people think about that. We are looking at upgrading at various intersections, especially in the BIAs where placemaking is of a higher importance. Also, we take an opportunity to upgrade our infrastructure in a more linear fashion rather than like dollops along the road. And that's when the road is up for a reconstruction or major road work. And for people who've traveled in on Bloor Street, for example, in the annex, at the beginning, we had the white sticks and paint, and now it's been fully upgraded with a whole bunch of placemaking updates as well. So that's how projects typically evolve. And sometimes there's a lag, and sometimes it's 5 or 10 years between those.
Great. Thank you, Adam. I'm going to ask for indulgence for just one more minute because there's a final question that we have here. And there are just a couple we weren't able to get to. And I just really do want to encourage folks to reach out directly to the project team for more details. But the final one I think is important to hold space is around enforcement and the role with the implementation of Vision Zero. So there are just some questions around police enforcement, around the laws for cyclists as well as drivers. And secondly, around the plans for automated enforcement, so red light cameras, speed cameras, and the like. And I wonder, Jacquelyn, if you could take that question.
Yes, thank you. And I've had a little bit of audio trouble, which is why I spoke over Adam earlier. So I hope you can hear me okay. But the city has endorsement from council to expand our use of automated enforcement. So we're in the process of gearing up. There's actually quite a lot of back end associated with that in terms of having officers review video to be able to issue tickets and having the court system be ready to process them. But with the administrative penalty system that was recently approved by the province, we're starting to be ready to be able to expand that significantly. It is still focused on community safety zones, which is primarily around schools, but there are some criteria we've recently had approved to expand that to focus on around parks and around community centers and other areas as well. So we'll be expanding where automated enforcement can take place. We also do fund the police from the Transportation Services operating budget, specifically to focus on traffic enforcement related to the things that are most impacting road safety. So distracted driving, aggressive driving, speeding, and generally the kinds of driving that cause deaths and serious injuries on our roads. They also do have blitzes for cycling related infractions, but the focus of traffic enforcement related to Vision Zero is around the kind of infractions that cause harm, that cause serious injury and death. So that is the focus on enforcement. Police also have an arm that work on bike lane enforcement, parking enforcement related to bikes, and that's both through cars and bike related bike officers that do enforce against that. I hope I captured that full question.
I think so, and I really appreciate that answer. I want to just express my thanks to our colleagues who joined us here tonight to share really important information, and I hope folks appreciate the complexity and nuance that goes with city building. These are really, really important projects and initiatives that we are trying to stand up, not just for today, but of course for the generations to come, the comfort and convenience of future generations, and sometimes there's a little bit of pain through the process when change is occurring. So we're really grateful for your engagement, for your participation, for your questions, and frankly, for your input along the way. And I hope you appreciate and have seen demonstrated through this process our willingness to hear from you, and not only hear from you, but to make appropriate adjustments where possible along the project to get the best that we can. So what's next? We've got one more town hall. This one will be in person, and we look forward to you joining and attending. It will be the evening of October 16th, and do keep posted if you're not already subscribed to our newsletter. You can sign up on our website, ambermorley.com/newsletter, and all of the details related to that, as well as other consultations and opportunities for community engagement related to other complete street projects and any other city building work that's happening. We really do our best to keep our newsletter informational and timely, so you all are empowered to participate in these important processes, because your voices are critically important. So with that, my thanks to everybody again for joining us this evening, for the extra couple of minutes on the call, and to our colleagues for their great and continued work building the best city in the world. So Good night, everybody. We'll see you on the 16th, and take good care.
Thank you.
Thank you.